Hi, this is Minder Chen. This is the second lectures on organizational structure. I'm professor of Management Information System at Smith School of Business and Economics at CSU, Channel Island. Last time we discussed 5 key elements in organizational structures, such as specialization, departmentalizations, etc. And then we introduced several style of organizational structure, including functional organization, divisional organization, and also matrix organization, which tends to be project-based, or in this case, you're seeing an example of a fully matrix-based organization, which may be based on project, and sometimes it may be based on product. They are functional areas, line of authority, but at the same time, people work in different project, has a reporting relationship to the project or product manager. And as Jay Galbraith in his article called Designing Matrix Organization That Actually Work, stated that the organizational structure itself do not fail, but management fails at implementing them successfully. And he argued that strategy, structure, which means organizational structure, processes, rewards, and the people all need to be aligned for successful metrics implementation. I highlighted this because I do believe that this can apply to any organizational structures, which structure is really part of the grand plan or blueprint, which should cover your strategy, your process, your rewarding structures, and certainly your people. All of them has to be aligned. If you remember that 7S framework from McKinsey pretty much say the same thing. If we go further down in understanding an organization through its organizational chart, we actually need to work on the job description for each of the job in the building block of an organizational chart. And here there's a link. You can download a template for job description. This is how you would define the job. For instance, if we need to hire a new faculty member, the search committee has to come up with a job description. We need to post it on the HR's website for hiring, and a very detailed job description has to be written. And so you need to add the job title and summarize the role at the beginning, and describe the essential job duty and responsibility, and also laid out the requirement qualification. For instance, recently we tried to hire an accounting professor, and we want somebody who has a PhD degree in accounting or a very closely related field. So if somebody just has a master's degree, even they have a CPA certificate, they're not qualified. That's the minimum requirement. So we will rule out those candidates which doesn't meet that particular degree requirement. And also we try to describe the kind of performance evaluation regarding how successful a person may be in their role, and also stated who this job or role report to, who may be the hiring manager. And this job description has to be verified by the hiring managers, who will be the boss that this person will report to, and also by the HR for some compliances related issue. So this is the website. You can get additional information about job description. And this a template that I got from a website, and you can find actually a sample template actually for a specific type of job. Like this is the one for accountant. So for instance, you would actually fill in the title of the job and say accounting job is reporting to accounting managers who they report to. And you would describe the job briefly and lay out the responsibility and duty. And eventually it's the qualification, including educational background, experience, specific skill, like you need to have like intermediate level skill in using Excel, and some kind of certification. Like if it's accounting position, you may want to ask for CPA certificate, etc. And if we look at kind of two different approach in terms of organizing in the company, one is what we call mechanistic approach. The other is organic one. And the mechanistic tends to resemble a bureaucracy. It's much more formalized, centralized, and which tends to be more rigid and resist changes. And it's this type of organizations are unsuitable for innovative and creative type of industry. And because they tend to be designed to maximize efficiency and cost. Foxconn, which is one of the world's largest contract manufacturers, operate in Taiwan and China, and actually around the world. They claim they want to come to Wisconsin and build up some factory, which is still a work in progress, tends to belong to this type. And a lot of iPhone that you may be using were produced by Foxconn, which in terms of the 5 key element, there tends to be, not always, this type of mechanistic organization tend to be specialized, centralized, formalized. It has a tall organizational shape, and they're often grouped by functional area. Organic one, in contrast, on the other side of the spectrum, tends to be more flexible, decentralized, less formalized. The communication line are fluid and flexible. Employees' job description are much broader, and they tend to relate to higher level of job satisfactions, and they are better for more entrepreneurial type of organization, small or big, and which tends to encourage more innovative thinking and practice. And Google comes to my mind when we talk about this organic type of organization structure. Once again, they're less specialized, they're more decentralized, they're less formalized, they tend to be a much flattened organizational structures, and they're often arranged based on division, product line, etc. So to summarize some of the key elements of organizational structures in terms of the question we asked, like to what degree are tasks subdivided into separate jobs? This is really try to this is actually related to work specialization. Next question is, on what basis would job be grouped together? This is related to departmentalization. And when you ask how many individual do manager direct, that's the span of control, which is related to the hierarchical level or hierarchical structure. The fourth question is related to where does decision authority lie? And this is related to centralization or decentralization. The last is to what degree would there be rules and regulation to direct employees and manager. This is related to how formalized, how formal an organization is. This is related to formalization. So the 5 key elements again: work specialization, departmentalization, hierarchical level, centralization, and formalization. And you can kind of ask 5 questions listed here to understand the 5 dimensions or elements in designing the structure of an organization. Let's get down to the practical matter a little bit. Is how do you draw the organizational chart? And before we introduce some tool, there's a concept we need to understand is sometimes we call it line and staff. The staff member are here they call it thinker. Personally, I don't like the term, but they are the one who doing some planning analysis. They're not the one carry out the plan. They're making recommendations, suggestions, so they're in the more advising role or kind of analytical role. The line official personnel, they are the doer. They are responsible for the execution of the plan. So usually in the organizational chart, they are the so-called staff member are represented by the dotted line. And sometimes people don't use dotted line, but they would show the staff member in the horizontal way instead of a vertical. Vertical are the line official, as we stated here, which means you have the line of command kind of authority, and staff authority are really the staff member. It's like legal counselors or providing legal advice to, say, the general managers. And so this is something you need to know. In terms of drawing actual organizational chart, assuming you know what the organizational structure looks like, you can use tool as simple as PowerPoint. If you in PowerPoint, you can hit Insert, and then you choose Smart Chart, Smart Art, and under Smart Art, choose Hierarchy, and then choose one of the hierarchical structure that you like. I would say probably this one over here would be a good one. And once you have done that, eventually they will insert a Smart Art area. You're allowed to enter text information, in this case people's name or the job title for a particular building block in your organizational chart, and also figure out how you can actually move those boxes around. So if you want to actually create a staff row, and then you can move this and move it to the horizontal line connecting to the hierarchical structure. So this is kind of simplest tool. If you have a PowerPoint, you can do it for simple organizational chart. This is a good one to have. Microsoft also has something called Visio, sometimes I use, which also has organizational charting tool that you can use. I found one online, which is really a web-based organizational charting tool. It's called Pinboard. Okay, right here. It's called Pinball. You can go and visit the website. I think there's a free account that you can give it a try and then create a simple organizational chart to see for yourself. Some of the advanced feature in this charting tool is actually you can enter personnel information into the system, and then you can drag and drop individuals, which you already have that information, into the chart. And this is earlier you see here are the additional information that you can describe an individual, like here. So there are lots of tools. This is just one of them. And explore. If you have an organizational structure that change constantly, this cloud-based, web-based tool can be very useful. Okay, that kind of summarizes our introduction of organizational structure. Let's get down to some more advanced topic and which are considered more contemporary. This is a diagram showing kind of on top of the formal hierarchical organizational chart, there are numerous informal structures among people at a different position in organizations. And sometimes we have certain people in the organization, they're lunch buddies. They tend to hang out together, although they may not have any formal hierarchical relationships. And I'll let you kind of study this. It's kind of interesting to see what's going on within the organization, something you may not even know. For instance, I do know that even at our school, sometimes some colleague has kids go to the same school. So they may have a little bit more communication or connection with each other, although they don't have a direct reporting structure. Just like the previous diagram was showing there's some informal relationship, this kind of iceberg showing that other than the formal organizational structure that we're seeing through the organizational chart, there are actually a lot of informal aspect of organizations. And for instance, there may be some informal leader because they have the expertise. They may not have the formal authority or the power. And also the emotional feeling, needs, and desires may not be showing in the formal organizational chart. And what you may be seeing in the formal organizational chart could be the span of control. You can certainly add policy procedures to it. This article, actually, picture is from an article from Strategy and Business Journal. You can actually access this article by following the link. We're not getting to the detail. They kind of classified some element of organizational design into formal and informal. Let's just get into an example, which is this portion, okay? And the formal part is called structure, the informal part is called network. The structure is how work and responsibility get divided, which are shown as a hierarchical and reporting relationship in the organizational chart. There will be a clearly specified role and responsibility, and we can also describe the business process. Okay, and on the informal side, which they call the network, it's how people connected beyond the lines and boxes in your organizational chart. And there are the conversation, the informal collaboration, teamwork with other work units, and also the informal organizational influence that one individual or units may be on others. Another interesting kind of depictions of various structure of companies, although may not be exactly reflecting what's going on in the company listed here, like Amazon, Google, Facebook, but there are some truths in it. I heard that the current CEO of Microsoft saw this and actually decided he need to do something to change the organizational structure or cultures of Microsoft, which means in this case indicating that different unit tends to fighting fiercely with each other. Google is more network kind of a based organization, which looks like a mess. Could be, can be very innovative, could be very messy. Amazon, to some extent, it's very disciplined, very traditional hierarchical structure. Facebook has the discipline, but it's more network-like. And by the way, Google's parent company is called Alphabet, which means they own a lot of company, including Google. Apple, you may wonder, what does this mean? I would actually explain this to you. At the center of this Apple structure when Steve Jobs was in charge is to some extent very centralized in terms of the decision making. It's centered around Steve. And Oracle, in this case, I guess the picture depicting Oracle really tried to state that the legal department has a strong power within Oracle. This actually may apply to some organization who may be under Justice Department investigation for monopoly, and in that case, the legal department may grow in size, or in this case, the like a local company, Amgen certainly is a very successful pharmaceutical company, but they actually also has a very strong legal department, which has a strong influence over the operation and the management of the organization. Let's look at Apple. Fortune magazines has an article describe the organizational chart when Apple was under Steve Jobs as a CEO, and pretty much everything centered around Steve Jobs. He has lots of senior officers reporting to him, including the current CEO, Tim Cook, over here. And also another important person is Johnny Ive, who is the Senior Vice President of Industrial Design. He and certainly Steve Jobs together are responsible for a lot of wonderful design that you enjoyed in terms of iPhone, iPad from Apple. And Scott Forstall, I think he left Apple already, who is responsible for the iPod product line. But here he was listed as Senior Vice President of iOS software, which is its operating system. And a lot of Apple's product launch event, you're going to see Phillips, who's the Senior Vice President of Marketing. And if you really let's look at what COO Tim Cook at that time, who he managed. He managed actually quite a few senior vice president. His level is considered, although it's called senior vice, he's not called senior vice president, it's called COO, but it's kind of at the same level as some other senior vice president. Under him, there are vice president of educational sales, channel sales, iPhone sales, and also this is geographical specific, a VP of Apple Japan, and VP of online store, which is based on channel. This is based on geographical locations. This is based on product and channel, and this is channel again. So this is how Apple was structured. It's very interesting in this case. I believe when Steve Jobs was in charge, every year he would call up 100 people from Apple, some senior manager, actually some which may not be that high level, to have a retreat and then meet and strategize and come up with a new strategy for the next year. Holacracy. There's a few articles from Harvard Business Review. I hope you would find time to find those articles and study a little bit. This is Holacracy basically means that they try to break down the wall for the traditional organizational structures. Zappos, which we may have introduced Zappos as an online shoe store headquartered in Las Vegas. They have tried this Holacracy experiment. It's still to be seen how successful they are in this kind of a risky experiment, I may say. They pretty much get rid of the so-called manager's title. I'll leave it to you to study this further. This just shows you there's a different way that we can organize, depends on the type of industry you're in and organizational culture that you try to foster. Let me introduce another approach looking at an organization in terms of how an organization can be structured. This is called enterprise architecture, and I borrowed this diagram from John Zechman's framework for enterprise architecture. And I like this framework quite a bit. I think this framework can be very useful in terms of help you to understand an organization and help you to manage. Let me kind of show you how to read this framework, to understand this framework. First of all, they describe 6 dimensions, which are data, information, function or processes that an organization need to engage in, network, which is really related to location, where you may be located, and you need a network to connect those locations, and the people aspect, which is the organizational unit, the team, and eventually the organizational structure, and the time dimension, which is when certain things need to be done, that I will call it event. And the last one is motivation and the purpose, why, and eventually the goals which you try to reach. So it's a list of business goal and strategy is under this dimension called motivation. And another way to describe the 6th dimension is motivation can be considered why. And eventually you will formulate your strategy and your strategic initiative and goals. And when to do what, that's your schedule. And the who dimension is about people and your organizational structure. So when we talk about organizational chart, it's really just the who dimension. This enterprise architecture is much broader. And the network or location is where. The function is how we do things, the business function, and what is about data. So this is very easy to remember if we use this so-called 5W and 1H to reflect the 6th dimension. What for data, how for function, where for network, who for people, when for time, and why for motivation. Please do remember this. You'll be tested on this. As you have seen in the enterprise architecture, sometimes we would focus on the business process instead of the organizational structure. Because if you look at a standard organizational chart, they're basically inward looking. We're looking at internally how we organize. In this business process map from TI Semiconductors division, you're not seeing the typical hierarchical organizational structure chart, and you're seeing actually, first of all, something quite different. You're seeing actually some high-level processes that the TI Semiconductor need to perform, including the development of strategy, development of product, and design and support customer and fulfill order. And this manufacturing capability deployment, which could be their manufacturing facility, are there to support some of this high-level business processes. What's unique about this diagram, which I like and use quite often, is that the customers or the market is part of this map, which we're showing not just the customer, but also the processes that the customer may have to go through in terms of producing their product or services. And we're focusing in terms of how we communicate with customers in our internal process with the internal process from the inside the customer's organization. So this is linking the customer with your internal processes. If you remember the balance scorecard, we have kind of customers, we have the internal process. This diagram kind of try to link the two together from the process orientation. Why process is important? Because although we may have a formal organizational structure chart like what we're seeing here, but from the customer's viewpoint, they got a need, they have the money, they want to buy something from us. And once we receive their order, the order will go through different departments of the organization. Eventually, we may need to get some raw material from our supplier. We will produce the final finished product and then deliver the value-added product and service to the customer. To some extent, the customer doesn't really care what's going on within our organization. As long as you deliver the product and service to the satisfaction of the customer, they're happy. However, within the organization, a lot of time we have information or demand from the customers being passing from one department to the other in terms of the customer's orders or just email. And there's a lot of white space, which are dividing the functional departments. And those white space need to be managed. And usually those white spaces are the area that nobody care and nobody is responsible. However, managing the white space on the organization chart is very important. Therefore, we argue that we would like to, another way to look at the organizational structure is from the process aspect. Here's the argument, because it's very difficult to measure the performance of a hierarchical structure, but we can easily measure the output, quality or customer satisfaction, see the happy face here, and of the process of the order fulfillment process as we describe kind of informally here. We can measure the cost, the unit cost for producing a product or fulfilling an order, or the cycle time. How long would it take for us to fulfill an order? And all of that can be measured. Remember, if you can measure, you can manage. If you can measure, you can figure out a way to improve it. Improve the quality, improve the cycle time, reduce the unit cost, etc. So a process orientation would be very useful to look at the organizations and how they handle various business events, which represent a demand from the environment. Once again, if you focus on the organization, on the customer of the organizations, then you need to empower the frontline worker who are what the customer dealing with on day-to-day basis. And in this case, managers are just in a supporting and coaching role, supporting the frontline workers to get the job done. Because a lot of time, the manager may be just sitting behind the desk, looking at computer screen, a lot of report, monitoring the situation. They may not be the one dealing with the customer directly, but to the customer, those frontline workers represent the whole company, which need the full support from every department and the top level manager as well. If we use the so-called value chain of people, you will find out that when you have satisfying employees that are happy, they will create a working environment which make customer happy. When you have happy and satisfied customer, your business profitability will increase, and which will also increase the shareholders' value. If you share that profit with your employees, they will be awarded accordingly. And when they're working in a very rewarding culture and environment, when you have happy employee, you will have happy customer. So this becomes a very positive feedback loop. Therefore, there's an argument that instead of having the traditional hierarchical organizational structure, we need to turn the organization upside down, put the customer at the center of our focus, and have all level of managers up there to support the frontline employee who are serving the customer. This is referred to as the inverted organizational pyramid. And this is particularly true for service-oriented organization like Zappos. Okay, that's it. There's a lot that we have covered, particularly in this lecture. We try to show you the different way to look at the organizational structure and how you can draw the organizational chart, how different company tends to have totally different type of organizational structures, and that may affect the the performance and the efficiency and effectiveness of the organization. So this is one very important area in understand the principle of management. Thank you. Bye-bye.